In this video, we will record the final two sections of Chapter 12, beginning with adult lifestyles, and where we will look at single adults, cohabiting adults, married and divorced adults, remarried adults, and gay and lesbian adults. Each of these topics just briefly touched upon. Beginning with single adults, there are many stereotypes associated with being single as an adult, ranging from the swinging single to the desperately lonely suicidal single. So some very positive, more positive and more negative types of stereotypes. Um, okay, millennials tend to find dates online more. It has become more and more common. Um, they have a pattern of what's known as fast sex and slow love, and so they're where they rush towards sex much more quickly than past generations, um, and less likely to commit early on to a more affectionate and committed relationship. Um, just to back this up, one study found that millennials are more likely than older generations to have sex before the first date. Before the first date, for instance. So uh, I guess that would be, things like hookups and whatnot. Um, Certainly, in older generations, you dated always before sex, but with current technology and online apps and things like that, it's not always the case. Um, okay, I'm going to move on. Cohabiting adults. Um, this refers to living together in a sexual relationship without being married. Reasons for cohabiting: to spend time together, share expenses, certainly does help with that, and evaluate compatibility. So for most cohabitors, this evaluating compatibility is important. It's the cohabitation is seen as a precursor to marriage, um, and so you're trying it out in a sense. This is true they say, for more than 60% of cohabitors, is that it is an evaluation stage. For others, it is an ongoing lifestyle. You're not testing out the relationship or the goods. I mean, like, it's just you're just not marriage oriented for one reason or another, and you're cohabiting for the long term. And I can tell you that is my situation. I call my partner my wife. We have rings. We had a little ceremony with our dogs in the backyard some years ago where we exchanged rings, but we never signed any legal papers or declared our marriage in any legal sense. So we are cohabitors officially. So it is an ongoing lifestyle. We're not trying it out. We've just been down the marriage road. We've both been down that road before, and chose not to do it again. So there are different reasons for people to cohabit. One interesting finding, somewhat interesting, is if you just gather a bunch of people that have cohabited before and you survey them, you find lower marital satisfaction and increased likelihood of divorce. So for those that have initially been cohabitors and then at some point they got married, um, they have less marital satisfaction, increased likelihood of divorce. And so I say this is a little surprising at first, because if you live together first, you're going to be more sure about getting married, and you should have higher marital satisfaction and probably less likely, less chance of divorce. That would be my first inclination. Um, but what actually is happening is that those people that cohabitate in the first place tend to be less conventional individuals. They're already less conventional individuals, and less conventional individuals tend not to believe in marriage in the first place. I mean, or they don't. It's not as important to them. So people that really take marriage seriously are also the same people that would not cohabit. I mean, if marriage is really sacred to you, let's say for religious reasons, for instance, I mean, you're not going to be a cohabiter. So all of those, so those people, none of those people would be included in this kind of survey. And so, once again, we're looking at a select part of the population. Those that cohabit, they're often the same people that don't really feel that strongly about marriage. And so, if you don't feel strongly about marriage, you're more likely. It makes divorce more likely, and you may not be satisfied with marriage, compared to your cohabitation time periods. Now, it does say it's not a unilateral statistic. It turns out there's kind of an interesting caveat here. This finding of lower marital satisfaction and increased likelihood of divorce for people that have cohabitated before marriage, it doesn't hold up if you only cohabit once with your eventual marriage partner. When we look at people who only cohabited with one person in their life and then they married them, they do not show lower marital satisfaction and they do not have an increased likelihood of divorce. It turns out that what pushes this finding are these serial cohabitors, people that have cohabited with two or more people during their life. Those are the ones that tend to believe less in marriage, more like and they're more likely to get divorced and they're less likely to be happy with marriage. Okay, let's go on. Married adults. Just some facts and figures here. Marriage rates in the United States have declined in recent years. Or for one thing, we have more people cohabiting. That is, the cohabitation rate has increased immensely over recent years. It's just gone skyrocketing. So with more and more people cohabiting, this is one of the things affecting the marriage rate. In 2014, 20% of U.S. adults had never married. This is surveying adults 25 or older. So looking at adults 25 plus, I mean, 1/5 of them had never married. Once again, they may have cohabited and still been with somebody, but it is a much larger statistic than we would have seen in past generations, in the 1900s. 2016, the U.S. average age for the first marriage climbed to 29.5 for men and 27.4 for women. This age has been climbing and climbing. We've been putting marriage off more and more. It's certainly, if you go back, just let's just say 50 years or so, I mean, like, you'd be looking at the figures much lower in the 20s as an average age. These numbers keep climbing. So it's almost up to 30 as an average for men. Marriage in adolescence is more likely to end in divorce compared to those that marry in adulthood. And this shouldn't be that surprising. We often don't know ourselves well enough in adolescence to make long-lasting decisions. Average duration of marriage in the U.S. is currently just over 9 years. And emerging adults are optimistic about marriage and see it as an impetus to create a stable life for a successful marriage. They rate emerging adults now rate marriage as being more important than parenting, more important than careers, and more important than leisure activities. So it's considered a very important life decision, or a life period is to get married at some point, even if we are pushing it off later. But once again, overall, emerging adults rate it as a more important decision, or as a more important behavior than parenting, careers, or leisure activities. All right, and I guess I should clarify that. I mean, like, it's more important to them at that time, like early in 20. Think about early 20-year-olds, as far as looking ahead to their future. They say see kind of marriage as a bigger decision or a bigger leap. Um, okay, let me go on. Benefits of a good marriage. Well, happily married people do live longer, healthier lives. A number of studies have shown this. It's estimated that an unhappy marriage can shorten a person's life by an average of 4 years. So, so you're cutting your life short if you're in an unhappy marriage. And if you wonder why is that? I mean, it would have to do with the extra amount of stress that you experience on a daily basis. If you're in an unhappy marriage, stress is a contributor to a shortened lifespan. So those that are happily married feel less physical and emotional stress. Just to pick up on that point here. So that means that there's less wear and tear on that person's body, leading to less physical ailments and less psychological problems over time. This is a graph looking back a few decades at the percentage of married people 18 and older that rated their marriages as being very happy. And so there was a rating scale, and this was kind of the top rating that you give that your marriage is very happy. So you can see that overall, the percent of people rating their marriage as very happy has declined from the 1970s through the early 1990s. But recently, it's flattening out somewhat. I mean, there's ups and downs, but you kind of look from the 1990s to the end of the graph. It kind of goes up and back down, but it hasn't overall changed that much. But it certainly is declining in the first 20 years or so of this graph, from the 70s to the 90s. Overall, throughout this time period, you can see that men rate themselves as happier in their marriages, or there's more men rating themselves as very happy in their marriages than women throughout this whole time period. And I don't think that's surprising. I think men tend to get the best of a marriage. I mean, that's my personal opinion. I mean, women tend to do more parenting than men do. Plenty of research shows that. They do more housekeeping. Plenty of research shows that. They kind of, the women in marriages kind of look after the family. They look after the relationship. They look after the household. I mean, I really think men are kind of getting the better bargain. So to me, it's not surprising that more men rate themselves as very happy in their marriages. Divorced adults. First of all, U.S. has one of the highest divorce rates in the world, but the numbers have been declining in recent years, or recent decades, I should say. Why have the numbers been declining? Well, not surprising. We always saw that there's less marriages. The marriage rate has been declining. So if there's less marriages, there will be less divorces. There's more cohabitation, once again, which is one of the things leading to less marriages. But there's more cohabitation. I mean, a cohabitation finishing does not count as an official divorce. And also, more single lifestyles are accepted. People are more likely to be single now than they were in past generations, and so that would lead to obviously less divorces as well. So do them one at a time. Sorry, there was a little bit of a hiccup with my screen, and I had to pause the recording. So all of these factors here make divorce more likely. I don't need to go through them, but just you can go through them and it should make sense. Each of these makes divorce a little bit more likely. Okay. This is the divorce rate in relation to the number of years married. And you can see that divorce typically takes place early in marriage. Between the years of 5 to 10 years is the real spike. And you can see it, just shouting out in this graph that between 5 and 10 years is the divorce period, the divorce time. Uh, it's it's still pretty high in first few years before 5 years as well. But it seems like once you get past that 10-year mark, then the percent of people divorcing is much lower, and it remains low throughout the rest of the marriage. So kind of like if you can make it to 10 years, then you have more chance of making it even much longer. My 10-year anniversary with my wife, even though we're not technically married, is next month. So maybe if we can make it past August, then we'll be together for a while. Okay, let's go on. Remarried adults. I don't have a lot to say here. Approximately 50% of adults that divorce remarry within 3 years of divorce. So about half remarry within 3 years of divorce. Men are more likely to remarry than women. It occurs sooner for those that initiate the divorce. Those are the ones that want out and want something different. They may already have somebody in mind, which led to the divorce, but the partner that's more surprised tends to be the one that's hurt more and takes longer to recover from a divorce. It's more later marriages are more unstable than first marriages. Once you've divorced once, it's easier to do it a second time, and in a sense, I mean, so it just makes it that much more likely. Later marriages are that much more likely to divorce. Higher rates of depression, but improved financial status in later marriages. Okay, let me go on here. Gay and lesbian adults. They are similar to heterosexual relationships in satisfaction and conflict. Just to give some background on this, I mean, hopefully everyone realizes that same-sex marriage was finally legalized in all 50 states in the U.S. back in 2015. Obviously, a very good piece of legislation. So there are some common misconceptions. Let me deal with a couple of them here. Masculine and feminine roles are relatively uncommon in these relationships. So the whole question about, well, which one of you is a man or which one's a woman is just ignorant and silly, and it's very rare that that's the case. And the rest of the last 3 points deal with the fact that people sometimes see gays in particular, or even lesbians, as being more promiscuous and sexually active with a lot of partners, and it turns out that that's really a myth. I mean, there are a small minority, particularly gay men, and even smaller minority of lesbian women that do engage in a lot of sexual partners, but the same can be said of heterosexual men. There's a lot of heterosexual men that engage in a lot of partners as well. So anyway, generally, gays and lesbians, the final point here, prefer long-term committed relationships with a single individual. I mean, which is also true generally of heterosexual people. I mean, the bottom line is that there aren't any major differences. There are people that want to be in love, whether it's with same sex or different sex. I mean, we're all the same that way. We want to find a partner and spend time with them. It doesn't matter the gender or the sex of the partners that we end up with. Going on, our final section in this chapter is marriage and the family. Well, that's why I've got it titled Marriage and Family here. In the book, it's called Challenges in Marriage, Parenting, and Divorce. I'm going to deal with the marriage and parenting parts, but not the divorce part. So let's look at making marriage work. I'm actually going to leave this for you. It's a short section, page 339. I highly recommend you read this. Look at Gottman's 7 Practices of Working of making a marriage work. So do read this on your own. Um, Going on, becoming a parent, myths and reality. So a few myths here. The birth of a child will save a failing marriage. If a marriage is failing, adding a ton more stress and a time consuming activity of raising a child, I mean, does not help the marriage. Okay, it distracts you from the marriage somewhat, so from the problems of the marriage. So that's why this myth exists. Is sometimes people say the relationship's better because both parents are concentrating on the newborn and the baby, and the focus is on that, and so some of the problems in the marriage get downplayed a little bit. It's not really helping the marriage; it's just distracting the parents from the marriage. The child will. Let me take these next 2 points together. The child will think, feel, and behave like the parents did in their childhoods. So sometimes we feel like they're going to be like us, like that what we experience, like they will experience the same kinds of issues and feelings. And the third point here, having a child gives the parents a second chance at achievement. Where maybe we didn't accomplish something that we wanted to, but now our child can do it for us. I mean, I want to take these points together because both of them are speaking to the issue of not just treating a child as a separate individual that have their own characteristics that you must learn about and just appreciate and parent around. Thinking that they're gonna feel or think like you did is not respecting their true feelings and their true thoughts and their true behaviors. Um, Trying to pass your achievement, um, your lack of achievement in certain areas onto your child, like I didn't win this award, or I didn't, accomplish this milestone I want to, so my child, maybe my child can do it. Whether it's in sports or some kind of activity, I was a great chess player. I'm going to teach my child to be a great chess player, and they'll get farther than I did. Whatever it might be. I mean, both of these points are speaking to that the problem that some parents have of not just learning who their child is and respecting who their child is. I mean, I think this is really, really an important aspect of parenting. That your child starts growing up even from the time they're infants. You start seeing their personality, you start seeing what their interests are, what their behaviors are, and how they think and feel. And it's a wonderful, miraculous journey to learn about them and to respect them as individuals, rather than try to have push your expectations onto them. You expect them to achieve something, or you expect them to do a certain sport or achieve something, or do well in school, or play, I don't know, learn some certain skills. I mean, like, or a certain trade, or have us go into a certain job field eventually. I mean, like these expectations, or expectations that they'll be like you in some way. I mean, it's not respecting the child for who they are. And so it's kind of going back to the goodness of fit idea that was kind of brought up when I talked about temperament in an earlier unit. But it's a similar idea, goodness of fit, of that you have to adjust to who your child is and how you parent them, and what you expect from them. And let me just mention my daughter, who's 14 now. Uh, I love sports. I really love sports. I played sports all from when I was 5 until into my 20s. I mean, and she hates sports, and it's it's always been something I wish, I want to watch her compete in sports at times, but it's not her. It's just not her. She doesn't give a crap about it. I mean, she doesn't want that kind of competition, and yet she's competitive in other ways. She's competitive in games, and she's competitive in her grades at school. She works really hard to get A's, and so I mean, it just turned, my competitiveness in sports just didn't get passed on to her. And so although at times I kind of would think, oh, it'd be cool to see her compete in a sport or something. I mean, it's just, you got to take your child who they are, just respect them as an individual. And too many parents try to shape their children. They have something in mind They see kind of how they want their children to turn out. They try to, do the shaping of their behaviors and thoughts and who they are over time. And it's really not the way to parent. You got to kind of parent. You got to let it come to you. Like, who are they? Like, figure out who they are and build around that rather than trying to impose on who you think they should be. So I don't want to keep going on with that, but I think it's a really important idea, and I see parents kind of miss that boat a lot in that they're trying to push things onto their children. Okay, and the final point is parenting is an instinct and requires no training. And hopefully you understand that's really kind of a load of crap. I mean, it's sure anyone can parent, but not anyone can parent well. So it's not an instinct. I mean, it may feel like an instinct if you don't care how well you do it. I mean, anyone can just go through the bases. I gotta get food into them. I gotta make sure they survive and sleep and stuff. But if you don't know, if you have no training or no knowledge, of what parenting is or what kids require at different ages, it's hard to do it right. So I guess you could say it's an instinct to not kill the child and to feed them and do the bare basics, but it's not an instinct to parent a child well. Okay, let me go on to the last slide. Oh, here we are. Okay, trends in childbearing. Trends in childbearing. Okay. What all I'm going to talk about here, I guess, is I'm not going to go through every point, but about the ages. So the first couple of points mention ages here. That the average age for first-time mother now is 27 years old. This has been rising. So women are having children later. In 2016, for the first time, more U.S. women were given birth in their 30s compared to their 20s. I think that's an incredible figure. You would never find that any other time in history that more than half the women given birth were in their 30s compared to 20s. So we've pushed childbearing onto being a later activity for the most part. Not long ago, in an earlier chapter, I talked about that we still have a very high teenage pregnancy rate, so it's certainly not everyone, but overall, we're bearing children later. So what I wanted to discuss here is the advantages of being a younger mother to having a child versus the advantages of being an older childbearing mother. Let me start with, there are a few advantages to giving birth at a younger age. One is that you would have more physical energy to care for the child. We're certainly more physically, healthy and at our peaks earlier in, like, let's say early 20s compared to 30s. You tend to have fewer medical problems with pregnancies and with childbirth. There's less risks involved if you're younger rather than older, and you're less likely as a younger mother to build up expectations for the child. Part of what I was kind of just talking about, that not having expectations for them. If a child comes early, much earlier for you, you haven't had years of thinking about it and thinking about exactly how you want your child to be or imagining how they're going to be. And so you might be more likely to take them as they are. For an older, and if you think about somebody that waits till, like, let's say they have the first child at 35 or something like that, they've had probably years thinking about, when they finally have a child, exactly what they're going to do, what it's going to be like. And so sometimes they might carry more expectations. There are certainly, I would say, more advantages to older childbearing. Mothers or parents in general have more income for childbearing expenses. You're more established. You're better off financially. It's not going to be the burden it is when you're just trying to start out a career and you have a child. More time to consider and achieve goals in life. So you can do that before you have a child. You can reach some of your other goals. When you have a lot of energy, when you're younger and employable, and then you don't have the same kind of family distractions. You can really rise in a career and establish yourself, and then, which is also obviously going to contribute to being financially better off as well. But okay, and then you have a child later. It's hard to it's kind of easier in that order than the opposite order of having a child early and then trying to establish your career, after that. I mean, that can be a little bit more difficult. It's particularly for women. I mean, it's which is unfair, but and then finally, the one that I would say is the biggest advantage is that an older parent is more mature and has more life experiences, and plenty of research shows that older parents engage in more competent parenting overall. You've learned just by living and by being around others and by seeing other parents, as an adult, like you pick up things along the way. You're just a better parent overall. Older parents tend to be much more relaxed with their children. Um, they're not as anxious and stressed out with them, and it can transfer to a more harmonious or happy or gentle upbringing of a child, in a sense. I mean, I guess I'm a little biased. Obviously an older parent, and so, but I did raise two stepchildren in the '90s. So going back, um, you know, over 2 decades ago, I had a family in the '90s, and they were stepchildren, but there's two of them, and I was a much worse parent then. A much better parent now. Just having lived so much longer, and I was just so much more ready to be a parent and have children in my 40s and now in my 50s. Oh yeah. Anyways, that will conclude chapter 12.